Hi, everybody. So I'm Karen Green, for those of you who are new to this afternoon. I'm the graphic novels librarian, and I'm the co-organizer along with Danny Fingeroth and Jeremy Dauber in the doorway there. Just one little thing to say is if you didn't get a program, they're on the table outside. There's also a sign-up sheet if you'd like to be on our mailing list for future comics events at Columbia. And the panel will last an hour. There'll be a half hour for book buying and book signing by our authors and panelists in the hallway outside. So without further ado, I will turn this over to moderator Danny Fingeroth.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody. Oh, hey, what a nice crowd. I just want to say a few things before we start the panel. And before we make introductions, since it is a New York panel, I have a PowerPoint that's got a lot of slides. I have a bunch of questions, but I encourage cross-talking, interrupting, and complaining. Okay, it is a New York panel, so let's do it right. So if I haven't asked the thing you wanted me to ask, or if I haven't asked it soon enough, or just about anything, So that's one thing I wanted to make clear. You may have noticed in the program that the panel is dedicated to the memory of Jerry Robinson, who we lost in December. We lost, unfortunately, a good number of comics luminaries in the past year, and the reason we're singling Jerry out is because Jerry went to Columbia. And so we thought that since this was happening at this university, so it's certainly not intended as a slight to any of the other wonderful talents that we lost. And, that's the Jerry-Columbia connection. So if anybody was wondering why your personal favorite may not have been mentioned. Starting on the left, on my left is Al Jaffe. Al's story has taken him from Georgia to Lithuania to New York City, where he attended the High School of Music and Art, the first graduating class, I believe. His comics career began in Will Eisner's studio in the 1940s, where he created Inferior Man. He also worked for Stan Lee, producing comic books like Ziggy Pig, Silly Seal, Patsy Walker, Super Rabbit, etc. In the 50s, Jaffe was also involved with Harvey Kurtzman's two post-Mad magazines, Trump and Humbug, but moved to Mad upon their demise, where he has worked as a freelancer ever since. He created the Mad Fold-In in 1964, still drawing it for every single issue of Mad. And also snappy answers to stupid questions, and I'm sure I'll get some snappy answers to some of my stupid questions. I'll be disappointed if I don't. All told, he has written and illustrated about 50 books. Current publications include the Collected Tall Tales, the Mad Fold-In Collection, 1964 to 2010, and his original illustrations for the recent biography, Al Jaffe's Mad Life by Mary Lou Weissman. Who's next? Miss Lasco Gross is the author and illustrator of Fantagraphics books, A Mess of Everything, named one of Booklist's top 10 graphic novels of the year, the follow-up to the YALSA-nominated Escape from Special. Currently, her work is featured in the show Graphic Details, Confessional Comics by Jewish Women at the Yeshiva University Museum through April 15th, and in Henny, a serialized adventure for the Comixology House of 12 iPhone app. Dean Haspiel is an Emmy Award-winning artist who created the Eisner Award-nominated Billy Dogma and illustrated for HBO's Bored to Death. Dino has drawn many superhero and semi-autobiographical comic books, and the superheroes are semi-autobiographical as well, and graphic novels from major publishers, including collaborations with Jonathan Lethem, Harvey Picard, Jonathan Ames, and Vera Lopez, okay, and recently with Tim Hall on The Last Mortician for Tor.com. He also helped pioneer personal webcomics with the invention of Activate for New Billy Dogma and other cool multimedia projects and profiles. Visit tripcity.net, a Brooklyn-filtered literary arts salon. And finally, I did the wrong order. Okay. And of course, who's got Tracy White? This is embarrassing. Who's got a program with Tracy? I got it. Tracy White. Writes and draws comics. She's the creator of the Ignatz-nominated autobiographical webcomic Traced, an ongoing series started in 1996, which was adapted for the Oxygen TV network. So Tracy is actually in between Al and Dean. I got my counting mixed up. She's the author of How I Made It to 18, a graphic novel. White is also an adjunct professor at NYU's interactive telecommunication program at the Tisch School of the Arts, where she teaches interactive comics and storytelling, and her website is traced.com. So we're looking at the first slide here is from Will Eisner. I think it's from To the Heart of the Storm. And the name of the panel is New York as Breeding Ground, which has sort of a science fiction kind of creepy feel to it. But it's our way of talking about people who either grew up and went to school in New York and how that affected their artistic vision, or people who were so eager to get the hell out of where they were and come to New York and how it affected that. So this is Eisner's rendition of himself as a child, drawing the spirit of St. Louis, Lindbergh's plane, for his friends, or maybe for his enemies so they wouldn't beat him up. But he was the typical neighborhood artist. So I'm going to go through some history here, and then, as I say, feel free to interject till I get to actual questions or not. This is the Art Students League, where a lot of comics folks went to school. This is Pratt Institute, where I know that Miss was eager to get out of Boston and come here to go there. This is Dewey Clinton High School in the Bronx, where an astonishing number of creative and accomplished people, not just in comics, but in like every field, Lerner and Lowe, Rogers and Hammerstein, James Baldwin, Fats Waller, Dan Shore. Okay, I will pick it up. Bob Kane, Bill Finger, who created Batman. Erwin Hazen, there with Gertrude Berg, who co-created Dondi. Stan Lee, who we'll get to his creations in a bit. Will Eisner, who was a sort of the ultimate New York comics creator, of course created The Spirit. Here's some Spirit material that is pretty New Yorky, even though it's called Central City. And here's the High School of Music and Art, where these two guys went to high school. On the left is Mr. Al Jaffe, and on the right is Wolf Eisenberg, who you may know as Will Elder. So Al, what is it with these New York high schools? Why do New York high schools breed, as the panel calls it, so many unique creative talents?
Well, I guess there was a fungus somewhere.
I mean, do you think it was just geographic that, here in the center of whatever, or was there something about the educational system?
I think the thing that helped most was that the comic book industry, the publishers, started in New York, and it just was a very natural thing for those of us who were graduating from the Great Depression to find easy work as cartoonists, because those of us who would like to do would have liked to have done cartooning in the newspapers. You getting into those places was near impossible, but the burgeoning comic book industry had open arms. I mean, I walked into Will Eisner's studio just with a little,
With this?
yeah, with this silly drawing. And I didn't have a script to go with it. I didn't have anything else. I
And
just...
what was the name of this character, Al?
Pardon?
What was the name of this character?
The name of the character was Inferior Man. He was the defender of the inept. And, pardon? Inferior Man is not on that?
No, this is...
Oh, there.
Inferior Man is on that.
Yeah.
That's what it became.
Yeah, that...
So how did you convince Will to...
Well, this
that.
was kind of a... I don't think it worked because
It wasn't inferior enough?
Will liked the idea. He was intrigued by, I guess, the fact that it was one of the early satirical attempts at making fun of Superman, and but I didn't have anything to go with it. And he said, "All right, we'll put." My original idea was, by day, Inferior Man was an accountant, and he decided that was not exciting enough. He said, "Let's put him in the Army because, you know, the war was on at that time, and we'll have his adventures in the Army." Well, I had not been in the Army yet, and I had no idea what life in the Army was like, so writing scripts for it was sort of alien to me, and it sort of didn't go anywhere because it was a bad combination. So it sort of, I think, died a slow death.
And as far as working with Eisner, I mean, what did you... I know you talked about things you learned from him and working with him. I know it was only briefly, but...
Will Eisner was a brilliant writer and, in my view, a brilliant artist of the time. I don't know how he would stack up today, but I think my friends and I all worshiped the spirit. We thought it was, you know, the cleverest thing to come down the pike. And it had a logic to it that didn't exist with Batman and Superman. We couldn't figure out how Superman was flying, whereas in Will Eisner's work, everything was logically worked out. But I can't say enough about Will Eisner. I think he was brilliant.
Now, Dean and Tracy, you both went to high school in New York, and I have your work later on coming up, but how did being native New Yorkers impact your work? Did you love being in New York, or were you dying to get the hell out?
I mean, I liked New York until I was a teenager and just, you know, wanted to do whatever my family wasn't doing, but and be wherever they weren't. But I think in terms of storytelling, when you grow up in New York, you know, most people are walking around. They're not in cars. And so you start seeing all these people, and you see all these different people, and they're not like your family. And you can go downtown. I remember going to Soho for the first time, and I was like, this is a different world. I grew up on 90th Street in East End. And you know, you don't have to go on an airplane. You could just go in the subway. And every day when I was going to school, I was on a bus, and I was looking at people, and it's like you see the same people every day. Everyone takes the same seat. And I watched this guy, I remember over the course of a year, getting hair plugs. And I remember, sitting across from him every day and watching there would be like a few more, and just thinking, you know, like, what is this guy's life, and does that hurt? And, you know, all these questions were coming up in my mind, and what's his story? And I just think that, you know, and now as an adult, I walk behind people and I hear their phone conversations, and I'm like, what are they saying on the other end, you know, and what are they doing? And I'm constantly taking photographs of people from behind because I'm interested, you know, I don't want them to know I have taken their photographs, but I'm kind of interested, what are people wearing, because for my comics, and I just think when you grow up here, especially as a kid, and you see so many people walking around, you can't help but wonder what everyone's story is. And I think that just gets your imagination going.
I mean, that's such a weird question. It's like, what makes a New York
Thank you very
story? I too went to Music and Art High School, not with Al, a little bit later, and it was an art school, and there, I don't know how many art schools are in the nation, but it seems to be in the major cities, and major cities often are melting pots of sorts, and they yield stories like what you're talking about, and you have access to these things. I think what makes my stories New York stories is that I was born in New York Hospital. I'm a native New Yorker.
I was born in New York.
Oh, really? Al?
Were you born in New York?
And
I was floating down in a basket.
But I think it's what, as a cartoonist and a storyteller, I'm just in some way reporting what's around me, and recording and reporting. So that's what makes them New York stories, by default. Listen, I worked with Harvey Pekar a lot, and he's responsible for a lot of Cleveland stories, The thing that I learned most from working with Harvey is that he observed, just like what you were talking about, and observation is key to telling stories. So that's what makes, ingrains these stories with their geography.
Now, Miss, you come from Boston, which is not exactly a small town, but
Well, I
what
grew up
were you
in the
getting away from and
suburbs,
getting
so-
to? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I having grown up in the suburbs of Massachusetts, where it was very homogenous, it was like white, liberal, Jewish, but homogenous in that.
Yeah.
And very dull. And all the things that my fellow panelists have been talking about are the reasons why I was so desperate to move to New York, and why I ultimately graduated high school early, so I could come and live here and experience that. And it is really good for your storytelling, because you can't avoid exciting and interesting encounters with strange and smelly people in the city.
Now, you said you'd only applied to Pratt. You had no plan B. That was...
I didn't. I wanted to go to Pratt. I had heard that it was a great school for cartooning, which it's not, but I had heard that.
You should have gone to DeWitt Clinton. That would have been...
And so that's where I wanted to go, because I was like, oh, I want to be a cartoonist. That's the place. And I didn't hedge my bets. I just went for it with a really lousy portfolio. But luckily, it all worked out.
Okay, so I'm going to return to the history. I'll quickly through it, but because this guy is a native New Yorker, Jules Pfeiffer, who went on, like Al, to work for Eisner. This is a famous story called 10 Minutes that I actually attributed to Eisner until I was giving a talk about it here at Columbia. And Jules was in the audience and said, I wrote that when I was 17. But that's got a real New York feel, that kind of Eisner, Pfeiffer, that candy and soda store. And then we go back to Al's classmates from Music and Art. The gentleman on the bottom, tangled up in the ladder, is Will Elder. And then Al is the guy with the words Al Jaffe above his head. Harvey Kurtzman was also in school with them, and this is a spoof of some famous ad. What ad is this spoofing?
I beg your pardon?
This picture is a spoof of a famous ad, or?
Yeah, it appeared in Trump.
Right, but what was it spoofing?
It was a pretentious. It was trying to capture the pretentiousness that other legitimate magazines use to advertise themselves, and so we thought we would do the same thing. I think this was a table of contents. The empty space on the right probably contained the table of contents,
Okay.
which obviously was nothing.
And then these same guys, before Al joined them, started this magazine, which had a certain New York sensibility. At kind of, I think Kurtzman and Wood put every building in New York in the back there. And then at a certain point, Al, you started. How did the fold-ins come about? Al, how did the idea for the fold-in come about?
How did it come about?
How did it come about?
Well, if you have the patience for this tedious story, I was casting about to come up with an idea for MAD, because that's what freelance people do to make a living. And I surrounded myself with fancy magazines, Playboy, National Geographic, Life magazine, and I noticed at that particular time that a lot of them had very fancy full-color fold-outs, and I thought, there must be an idea here somewhere for MAD. And of course, the natural thing that occurred to me was that if they have big, fancy, full-color, expensive fold-outs, MAD would have a cheap black and white fold-in. And so I did it as a one-shot gag, figuring, you know, this thing doesn't have any legs at all. And mainly because when I approached the editor, Al Feldstein, I said, Al, you're not going to buy this idea. I think it's funny in itself, but you're not going to buy it because it mutilates the magazine. And he was intrigued, ran into Bill Gaines's office, came out and said, Bill wants to go with it. He said, if the kid mutilates the magazine, he'll buy a second one for his collection. So by default, I got a job.
And that's lasted.
Pardon?
That's a job that's lasted to the present day. I mean, in color and everything.
Yes, since 1964. I can't do the arithmetic.
It's a lot. Were any of you other panelists inspired by? Where did Mad Magazine fit, if anywhere, in your cartooning education?
I don't know. I read it every month. I love the parodies, you know, and I love the humor. I think I soon realized that I wasn't going to be a funny cartoonist, because it's just a whole other way of thinking, you know. But because I was attracted to the superhero stuff, and then later on the autobio stuff. But I loved Mad Magazine. It was like a perennial every month. And was it quarterly now, I guess? Or seasonal?
Has it gone back to bi-monthly, I think?
Or bi-monthly? But yeah, I mean, alas, I have not read it in years, but I have a fondness and nostalgia for it. Yeah, Jack Davis, all those guys are amazing, you know.
Tracy, Miss, was it an influence at all, or?
I mean, we were talking earlier, and I used to get comics every Sunday with my dad, and Mad was certainly one of them, along with Thor and Archie. And I think, I think that probably an influence in the way that New York is an influence as a background to stories. This was just another thing that I grew up with, so the idea of combining words and images to tell a story was really natural. And it's just one of the many, you know, subtle influences, I would say, just because you're always reading those things as a kid, and then it seems natural that that's the way that you would communicate a story.
And speaking to what Tracy's saying, don't forget, like, the first comics you see, that's how you think you should draw things. Like, when I saw Jack Kirby comics, that's how you do superhero comics. Or Will Eisner, that's how you draw New York City. Like, these guys broke so much ground in figuring out the certain visual lexicons and the ways that we think and see in comics, that it's actually really difficult to break out of it as your own author, artist. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's these perennials out there, these classic ways. Well, they created it. It wasn't classic before that. But, you know, there are mythology.
Did you have a sense of it as a particular New York or New York Jewish thing?
Well, I was in New York. I'm reading it in New York, so it's got to be New York. You know,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
the only way I think. You know, like, I didn't think academically in any way. It's just how I absorbed it, and so that's how I spit it back out. And to me, that's, you know, if I'm drawing anything, you know, like, buildings have to have that little kind of, you know, lip on the end, and you draw the windows, and some bricks, you know, not all the bricks. You know, you learn all these little tricks, and to me, that's always New York City. I'm still trying to figure out how to differentiate Manhattan from Brooklyn, you know, without using the Empire State Building, you know, sometimes.
Tall buildings and the lower buildings.
I know, but we
architecture is different.
Yeah, I mean, besides the height, there's still like
I
a lot
know
of.
what you're saying you pick up a lot of shorthand for how
Yeah.
to show the city from reading things like Mad Magazine.
And out there in the wilds of the Boston suburbs, did you think, oh, this is coming from New York, I must
No, I think
respond
everything
to the
that was
beacon?
actually published that I got my hands on, I thought it kind of came up from above. I never really considered there were people making it until I was older. But my dad used to get Mad Magazine and give that to me, and I enjoyed especially the movie parodies and all the jokes I didn't get because they were just like,
the subtlety of the Mad Movie Paris. Okay, just moving historically quickly through. This is Jerry Robinson, who the panel is dedicated to. Jerry with a very mischievous grin on his face, which might indicate how he came up with this character. And then a little New York. There's Jerry did the cover to New York World's Fair. So now you know the world is fair. New York World's Fair comics. There's the Trilon and the Perihelon. Do I have that right? Perisphere, okay. In full detail. You would have to be a New York, actually Jerry was from New Jersey, but he eventually moved to the Bronx and into Columbia. But look at that's well, you know who it is. And
96 pages for 10 cents.
Now it's free online.
And then here is Ed Sullivan, who some of you may know only as the host of the Beatles, but there's the Ed Sullivan Theater where the Letterman show is. All these artists have, sometime in the 60s, did Ed Sullivan's portrait, because he was also a powerful Broadway columnist. There's Jerry Robinson on the left. In the middle is Irwin, who some of you may have seen at the panel this morning. And Leonard Starr is in between Irwin and Jerry. So just that was an interesting piece of New York history. This Steve Ditko Spider-Man, very New York, and Ditko was a student of Jerry's. Jack Kirby, another person who kind of established the look and feel in comics. There's Kirby's city in the Fantastic Four with New York in the background. We saw this yesterday. There's Kirby's memories of his childhood growing up. And then Street Code. We have both street codes. There's another street code. This is another person who came desperately to New York, and then I guess just as desperately got the hell out. You can see Crumb might not have had the most positive, but the East Village Other was the ultimate New York underground publication where a lot of cartoonists got started, including Kim Deitch. And this is the office at the East Village Other, is drawn by Kim Deitch with the bullpen. There's Spain Rodriguez. Is this mythology that resonates with any of you? Is this,
I'm sorry I keep talking. Bob Fingerman's in the audience, and it was occurred to me that one of the things that encouraged me to tell more New York stories was minimum wage, which later on became Beg the Question, the collection. And Bob's always been a progenitor of New York stories and convinced me, and I don't know if you have any of that as an example up here at all, but
I don't.
But yeah, no, I mean Bob, a lot of his stuff like encouraged me, as like I said,
I limited myself to 50 slides.
50 slides, okay. And I don't know if Bob wants to get up here and talk about this as well, but okay. And then actually Ben Catcher, who's sitting over there, is another guy whose stuff that I like, reading in the New York press was telling all these oddball stories, but the way he drew buildings and the people, and how they, encompassed, the whole story of this New York look. They're the different folks that like I lean towards. It's funny, I never really read a lot of underground stuff. I think my underground comics was like Bob Fingerman's and Ben Catcher and besides the superhero stuff that you're showing.
Is this mythology for anybody else, or just Al? Did these guys have any resonance for you? The underground guys when they were doing in the 60s and 70s?
I'm not really familiar with this.
I'll say this.
Well, this is a family
Yeah.
picture.
Well, these are And Al, these were all guys inspired by you. I, but speaking of somebody inspired by the underground was, oddly enough, Will Eisner, who reinvented himself and comics with A Contract with God. He said, oh, look, you don't have to tell kid stories. You can tell serious stories with comics. And then we get to, Dino, is that LaGuardia? Is that where you went to school?
Okay. Yeah, I went to music and art, and I was in the first graduating class of LaGuardia High School.
So is that the right
which
building?
is that building, I think. I haven't been in a long time. And it was right next, it was behind Lincoln Center.
And I think, yeah.
Oh, my Lord. That is so gay. I don't even know who that person is on the top right.
Yeah, Handsome Boy Modeling School.
So wrong. That's Larry O'Neill, who, if fans of comics would know, Denny O'Neill. That's his son. You know, Denny O'Neill, the writer, editor of comics.
And Larry is now a filmmaker.
And he's a filmmaker, and I've been hanging out with him lately. He's been coming to my studio and writing his next screenplay at my
Wow.
studio.
So what was it? So what was it like in New York? I
It was
guess that must have
mischievous.
been the 80s.
It was the 80s. I have a lot of scars on my body to prove that I'm a blood brother with some folks here in the city. You know, you were talking about, what you said something interesting about you would be where your parents weren't kind of thing. I mean, those are the rebellious years, you know? That's where you're, you know, learning Old English 800 malt liquor. And I abhor tobacco and smoking and everything. I don't know why we have cigars in our mouths. Like, what?
Because you're 14 years old.
And that guy's hand on my shoulder, because it was just like a little homage to me and Larry, is actually Josh Neufeld's hand, who also is a cartoonist New Yorker. So I mean, I grew up with a bunch of guys just like Al did, you know, doing our comics, and then eventually getting to work with Howard Chaykin, Walt Simonson, and Bill Sienkiewicz in 1985.
Yeah, now
that was that year, 1984. Yeah, so like a year later, I was working with like 3 hot dog cartoonists.
Yeah, so like
you know?
Al did with Eisner, you did an apprenticeship. How did that come to be? How did you,
Well, Larry actually. Larry was a budding cartoonist before he became a filmmaker. I've never had the balls to be a filmmaker. I would love to make movies, but you know, there's something about that's old artwork from way back. That's me and Larry, a collaboration we were doing. But what I really liked, as we all know, is the unlimited budget of the blank page, and you can do anything, you know, at home without having to, you know, necessarily spend a lot of money to do it. So 1985, Larry gets wind from his father, Denny, that Howard Chaykin needs an assistant to work on American Flag because I think he was getting rid of one or somebody was leaving. And then I got all jealous. I was like, really? Like, you're going to go? I mean, I'm the guy who really wants to do comics, not you. But whatever, he was still into it. And then he got wind that next door, Bill Sienkiewicz needed an assistant. But I think it was more that he was just jealous that Howard had one or something. I don't know. So I get there, and I'm like, there's no way what I'm drawing matches anything that Bill's doing. But I wound up working on New Mutants, Elektra Assassin, and doing some of the backgrounds then and everything. But I was hanging out more with Howard because Bill was constantly like on the phone with a therapist or something, and just, you know, he was getting Psychology Today. I think he was preparing for Stray Toasters or something. But I was jiving more with Howard, and then Walter was in that room, the room next door with James Sherman is another cartoonist, and previous, I think Jim Starlin and Frank Miller and some other guys had been in the studio. So I kind of like hopscotch between Bill and Howard, and then eventually worked also with Walter on the Thor, specifically the frog stories, when Thor became a frog, right? So
Tracy, were you reading the frog stories? Or?
Huh?
I wonder if Tracy was.
Oh, so yeah, that was fun stuff. So I mean, but then it was the first time I knew at age 17 going on 18 that I was among gods. You know, like there's American Flag, I'm working on that. Thor. Bill Sienkiewicz, you know, working on the books he was working on. Actually, Dennis Cohen and a guy named Michael Davis moved in with Bill Sienkiewicz. So I was surrounded by these incredible, you know, storytellers and story makers. And in fact, with guys that not only were learning or knew how to collaborate in the franchise comic system, but were also, you know, splitting off to do their own works, you know, like with First Comics and you know, these kinds of independent publishers. So I was getting schooled a lot, you know, or just by you know, proxy, just by being in the room. And then they would pull pranks on me and that kind of stuff, which is a whole other story. But that was a year of real education. I was going to an arts high school that had not taught me perspective. And it would slap my hand if I drew a comic. But then at 3 o'clock till about 6 o'clock, I was hopping a train with Larry O'Neill to learn comics that was encouraged and teaching me so many ways to show a story with art. In that 1 year alone was so much education, you know? So my mentors.
Can I just, because when you just were saying, you know, ways of telling stories, and when you you showed...
Tracy, here's a page of yours.
When you were talking about, maybe you'll go this one. Which one? Contract with God that Eisner did. I know that was, I think before that there weren't really stories about immigrants or you know, that type of story, something that's talking about God. I mean, maybe that kind of got the ball rolling in terms of eventually autobiographical stories and these universal ideas of things that we all go through that are very, in a way, I know superheroes have that idea, but just trying to have these commonalities that we can talk about in comics that are very different from superheroes. And I think those stories that Eisner did sort of set that ball rolling so that people like us, you know, today are doing autobiographical stories and writing about, I know Miss's book talks a lot about really heavy issues like bulimia, and my own work also talks about depression and eating disorders and things that weren't typically talked about. And I think that kind of can go back to Eisner and those early works, people that we were talking about in the East Village who began to set the precedent for a different type of story that can be told using words and images.
Now you were very involved in the internet and the opening days of the internet, and most of your comics have been
yeah,
online.
I've been doing comics online since 1996, 95.
Is that related to New York and Silicon Alley and all that?
Well, I was at that time I was at a program at NYU that I teach at now called Interactive Telecommunications Program, which is just looking at technology and using technology to do things in different ways. And when I was there, I was interested in comics, and when I was thinking about technology and how can I use the technology to tell a story in a different way. And if I'm going to use the technology, I'm not going to just have it be that I'm going to put something online that can be printed out on a page. And I'm going to really think about presenting my story in a way that's unique to a computer. And this page is actually from a book. It's the only book I've ever done, and that was 2 years ago. So I've been doing stuff for since '95, but only in 2008 did I actually go to paper.
Here's some of your
oh yeah. So that's so yeah, this is New York, and I think this is I had just gotten my ears pierced, and as you can see, this black and white. When I first started doing comics, it was in '95. 96, it was Netscape 1.0, and most people were using modems. And if you wanted your images to be seen quickly, and your target audience for me, which was teenage girls, were probably using the older computer, which had even a worse modem. You wanted people to be able to look at your images quickly, and so black and white was the easiest way to do that, and that's why I started out in black and white. Now it's just that's the style that I'm known for. And that's another scene of when I was a teenager, and I spent a lot of time in clubs, and so I didn't go to college, and did a lot of stuff in the East Village, and that's just, I think you wouldn't maybe get that if you were growing up in a suburb where you could just go to clubs and be out until 5, 6 in the morning, and then dancing all night and getting your tattoos and going to piercing clinics and doing all the things that I did that are very, maybe, I don't even know if they're typical New York, but certainly I don't think you could have done them if you weren't in a place like New York City.
In the suburbs, you have to, because there isn't that opportunity to do it the right way. You have your friend pierce your ears for you, so in a way you end up more of a degenerate because you're starved for that kind of...
Oh, I had that with the potato. We did those behind the ear.
I didn't even have a potato, I just had stab.
Miss, so here's a massive episode. How was this done in New York after Pratt, or?
Yeah, this was done in New York. If I could go back to contract,
Oh, sure.
I just wanted to say that that really, like Eisner's contract, it really opened the door to do like big stories about people who'd be small people, not really literally small like me, but like small in the sense of like someone who'd be ignored by an epic superhero story, or even maybe a more comedic story. And just it's the neighborhood that I live in. I live in the Lower East Side, and I have been for the last 16 years. So I consider myself a New Yorker, but it's the idea that, in any given window you look in, there's a story in there. And that's important for someone like me to do the kind of work that I did. If there was no precedent, I think it would have been harder to sell to a publisher.
Was Picard an influence or a precedent at all?
He wasn't an influence, but the way he changed the comic marketplace, I think probably helped me. And the people he was an influence on, but I didn't read him until I'd already done a graphic novel. But it's the same idea. He was probably pulling from the same source, Eisner and his contemporaries.
Did you know about The Spirit? Was that on your radar at all, Eisner's The Spirit?
Only as an adult. When I started to get into EC Comics and then started to look around in every direction that those people spread from, that was something that I enjoy as an adult.
So now tell us about it. So Mess of Everything, is this New York informed?
At the very end of the book.
Yeah.
At the very end of the book, I end up in New York, and it's about fleeing the suburbs for the city. But even though I did this in New York, this is looking back on the suburbs. So I guess it's because I had the distance of being in the city. You have a clearer view looking back of what was ridiculous and what was exciting about the suburbs.
I commissioned a New York story from Miss for this series called Next Door Neighbor.
Oh yeah, I believe you showed that.
Right.
What was that?
Where she tells a classic story about a neighbor, but it could only happen. Well, no, it's not true. It can only happen in New York, but big cities yield these kinds of stories that you can get. But
yeah, in the suburbs, if you had a neighbor that was causing that kind of trouble, you stay in your house, they stay in their house. It's not someone in your hallway screaming about needing to be let in while they're in their Halloween costume as like a sexy schoolgirl.
And now, these are not New York images, but when I asked you for New York-inspired art, this is among the things you sent. How was New York inspirational in this?
I think I just sent the one on the left as an act of shameless self-promotion. I don't think it actually has to do with New York. It's
well, shamelessly self-promote, please.
All right, this is from Henny, which is a story I'm working on, which is, I guess I pitch it as cute animals and religious fundamentalism, but it's actually kind of in the vein of Bone and, an adventure story, but it's about the dangers of fundamentalist thinking. And then on the right was kind of a goofy piece that I did for a podcast anthology, which was explaining where candy canes come from. Yes,
well,
Bristol.
that brings me to the end of the slides, but I did want to talk about, Dean, you, I know, have had a couple of different important internet ventures, and Miss has been on them. Tracy, have you been on any of Dean's internet ventures?
No.
No, you have your own internet world.
But I have my own website, and I've had it since 96, so it's been pretty much
So
doing
has the
things there.
internet made New York more or less important in the cartooning world?
I think that, the things that we've been talking about here in terms of the inspiration that you get from the people that you meet or the people that you don't meet but are wondering about, that's still a very, very New York. What the internet does is allows you to put up your work, and anyone in the world can see it at any time, and that's which is in a way kind of a New York idea that everyone comes here, and then on the internet everyone is there.
it's funny because I still think people are coming to New York to see my website, but in a weird way. And I just thought of this, because that question, I was like, as an artist or a cartoonist or a writer artist of representing New York and other stories, you're an ambassador of sorts of New York, because people are using your stories to get an inkling. I want to ask Miss, I've never had to come to New York. I've always heard the story and then I went to New York. I don't know what that's like.
You're lucky. You're very privileged.
I'm white, male, and I'm a New Yorker. I'm very privileged. Me and Louis C.K.
Yeah. But I don't think you would appreciate it, or I would think that you all would not appreciate it the same way someone who has to, make their way there would.
Exactly. That's got to be really difficult. On the flip side, I'm a cartoonist, so I don't get to enjoy the virtues of New York, at least the stuff that I think the tourists or the people come to New York for, because it's just too expensive. you know? So I've had to learn how to make a Friday night sitting on a stoop or walking around and, you know, hanging out with some friends and pointing at people and you know, making fun of them. But that's like what I can afford, you know, as a cartoonist. But then again, by default, you get these neighbor stories and the things that we observe and the things we experience and tell.
You know,
I'm sorry. I think also still people are still coming to New York. What Dean was saying, and so you're still, even though I think that the internet really disperses everything, there's still this, where do people go? Mm-hmm. And I think that still people are coming to New York, and you're meeting those people, and the kind of the creative exchange of ideas happens not always online. You know, it happens when you see people.
Well, and you know, I co-created and founded Activate, this webcomics website in 2006, and then last November created Trip City, and I distinctly said it's Brooklyn filtered, because I realized after a while, I'm not international. You know, this is where I'm from, so why might as well say it, you know?
You crossed the bridge from Manhattan to Brooklyn.
This morning. It was very difficult.
And vice versa.
I'm from here, I'm from Manhattan, but yeah, I became a Brooklynite somehow.
I think we have time for some questions. Oh, I'm sorry, Missy.
oh, I just wanted to say that the flip side of the whole coming to New York is now that I'm a mom, and I have a son who was born here and who's going to be raised a New Yorker, and my husband and I, we find ourselves debating, should we move somewhere else, or should we let him be
stay.
raised here?
Where's your husband from?
What's that?
Where's your husband from?
Philly. He's a cartoonist too, Kevin Colden.
Oh, that's
But
where you're.
he's the question is, the kids in our neighborhood are such little animals, and we're trying to speculate what our son is going to be like, and you know, we don't want him to do this or do that, and so then that becomes the question. And then I point out people like Dean. I know, I was like, well, Dean's from New York. He's okay.
Well, Al, you were a city kid, then you went to the suburbs, and now you're back. Al, you were a city guy, then you went to the suburbs, then you came back. So the suburbs not all they cracked up to be?
Well, the thing about New York City that I think affected me in working for MAD, the advertising agencies, by and large, are pretty heavily represented in New York. And at one time, I think they were only in New York. And the early television also emanated from New York with NBC and CBS and others. So in doing the kind of work that I've done for Mad Magazine all these years, I found that the atmosphere of New York lent itself very easily for satirical material, because you were surrounded by, advertisements that television shows that originated here, and so much of the commercial activity of the country was emanating from New York, or at least it felt that way, and so you were inundated in this stuff, and it was easy to pick things to have fun with. And I think it influenced me, and certainly my friends Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder, and even Jack Davis came to New York to get started.
Do you think the work when you lived in the suburbs, do you think the work you did was different than the work you do now that you're back living in the city for quite a while?
I think it was. I think my frame of mind tended to see things from more of a bucolic setting rather than the rumble of New York. But I moved back to New York about 50 years ago or so, and so I think I'm a New Yorker now.
Well, the suburbs did give you snappy answers to stupid questions. That can only happen in the suburbs.
That's true.
If you don't mind telling that story again.
You want to hear that again?
I never get tired of it. Yeah.
I think everyone is bored with that story.
We'll be the judge of that. Yeah.
Well, I'll gloss over it for those of you who have heard it. On Long Island, everyone, when I first moved out there, had an antenna that was attached to the chimney. And periodically, God, who apparently did not care for television too much in those days, sent a storm that would knock the antenna over. And we had to climb up and straighten the antenna. I have a great fear of heights. I borrowed an extension ladder to go up the equivalent, I think, of 3 stories to get to the top of the chimney. And I'm hugging the chimney because I'm scared to death. And I'm trying to tighten the steel ring that's around the chimney. And I hear footsteps on the ladder behind me. And as they approach, the voice says, "Where's Mom?" At this point, I said, "I have killed her and I'm stuffing her down the chimney." And of course, the footsteps rapidly retreated, and my son didn't speak to me for about 2 weeks. But when you're a freelance writer or artist, your wife goes out shopping for food or whatever, and if she's not there when the kids come home, the first thing they do is they want to know where Mom is, as if, you know, you're attached to her all day. But when I got down, I said, you know, there's something here. What can I do for MAD with this? And I quickly jotted down a bunch of annoying experiences that I've had and quickly sketched illustrations with it, brought it in, and it was immediately bought. So that's how that started, inauspiciously.
Does anyone have any questions for the panelists? Gene Kannenberg is racing to the microphone. Gene Kannenberg Jr., ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. How do magazines such as MAD tackle social issues such as bullying, which may not have a reader audience, but it's a very hot topic these days?
What was the?
Did you say boating?
Bullying.
Bowling?
Bully. In high school.
Oh, bullying.
Bullying.
Well, I was
Is that question for Al?
I was
or?
bullied at a bowling alley. You know, MAD magazine, like all publications, and that includes everything you read or see, has to keep up with the times. Bullying has been going on since one caveman hit another caveman over the head to steal his girlfriend. Well, MAD, in the early days when I was producing a lot of material for MAD, which I'm not doing anymore, I'm just sort of limited to the fold-in and snappy answers, because I haven't kept up with bullying. But MAD has to keep up with what's current, and of course, it goes to much younger people who are experiencing either the effects of bullying or are bullies themselves, and that's why they get the straight dope. So I'm not part of the editorial board of MAD. I'm a freelance writer-artist, but I know how these guys work, and they expect material to come in that's current, and bullying is one of the things, and their internet games are another thing that, you know, I don't play them, but the readers do. So they have to stay on top of this.
This one's also for Al. Not exactly a question, but maybe it is sort of. I started reading comics when I was a very young kid, and my parents never threw anything out. I was very blessed that way, except for one thing. I forget how old I was, but I got an issue of Mad Magazine, and there was a fold-out on the back that I didn't understand. You folded it in, and there was like this acronym that showed up. and I didn't know what that meant. I looked in the dictionary, I couldn't figure it out. So it was late at night, I woke up my mom and said, "Mom, what's VD?" So, and then they throw out my Mad magazines. So I just wanted to thank you for that little bit of preteen rebellion that I had.
Thank you,
VD
Gene.
is very good design.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Well, come up to the microphone, please.
How you doing, man? Actually, this is a question for Dean, or really anyone can answer it really on the panel. But I'm curious, you've been blogging about the lives of making a living as a cartoonist today. Now, what's it like in New York now? Can you speak to that a little bit about some of these issues you've been talking about?
It's tough.
Yeah, in New York, but it obviously reflects to the larger world.
Apparently, it's been tough though since the beginning of making comics. So it's like, why am I crying? It's just really tough to be a freelancer, number one, forever. So like what Al does, and like what I think a lot of us do, is you have to generate your own work, and hopefully have access to a door that's slightly ajar, and then crack it open. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the 3 major graphic novels I've done, between The Quitter with Harvey Picard, Jonathan Ames with The Alcoholic, and then Cuba My Revolution with Inverno Lopez, DC wasn't coming to me and knocking on my door for those. I went to them. And then I, got to play with some of their toys, which, I'm a big fan of superhero comics, so I wanted to do that. But then I realized, I wasn't going to get the regular monthly gig. And so I had to use the DIY tools that were presented to us at the time, which is the internet, is blogging, is, you can create your own website. When people come up to me today, they're like, how do I do this? I'm like, I don't know. Just show up to the party, and on a regular basis. That's the only way that anybody can get through this,
Maybe move to New York.
We'll move to New York. But that's that.
A lot of people here.
Well, there's a lot of people there, but maybe it is better to. I mean, listen, look how many people came out of Ohio. There's a lot of great cartoonists that came out of Ohio.
They came out. They didn't stay there.
And well, that's true. But you don't necessarily need New York for that. I think there's an energy here that is unmatched. The fact that we can sit in a room with, look how many people in the audience. We got, Paul Levitz, Chris Claremont, Peter Cooper. Other people have represented New York in their stories. I'm sure there's a ton of other cartoons. Cliff over there. There's New York City. Talk about breeding. It's an infection of sorts. Like it's the best kind of virus you can have. I think is the fact that there's some weird domino effect happening. But to Calvin. It's just really difficult, and you just got to stay on top of things. The way they get you is that once you're in love with comics, you're always going to probably do comics.
No matter how badly they treat you.
No matter how badly they treat you. So if you're aware of that, then you know how to negotiate from there, I think.
Jonathan?
I wanted to ask Miss to elaborate a little more. You started to talk about what it's like to come to New York as like a wannabe artist. So I just wanted to hear a little more because New York is both a breeding ground for the natives who produce, but also it's a magnet. So can you talk a little bit more about getting in and finding your way?
I would say I initially tried to continue what I've been doing in Boston, which was a horrible way to do comics, which is just I do what I want and then I bring them to stores on consignment. And then you go back and you bug them at St. Mark's Comics when they, accidentally lost the stuff that they sold, and you try and get paid. And eventually, I think I started to do more what Dean's saying, where you make your own proposals, you do your own pitches. And for me, especially because I don't do a superhero stuff, there isn't the opportunity to really apprentice. Because in indie comics, most people like the take is so small at the end of the day that like you'd be looking for such a small piece, it would be like third world wages. Like you'd probably be better making shoes in China. So
I think also, just to go back to answering Calvin a little bit, I think New York prepares you to survive, to be a survivor. Whether it's trying to live in New York City and be a freelancer, that's a double-edged sword, So I think what it does is it really tests you and challenges you in a way that if you can get by, you're already like winning. in some way. At least that's what I
You
tell
can get
myself at
by
night.
there, you can get by anywhere. Is that-
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was going back to Picard. My favorite moment in American Splendor, the movie, is an out of context moment where Harvey Picard is sleeping and having a nightmare, and he wakes up, and the only thing he says is, "I have a job. I have a job." And I was just like, what a brilliant scene! Like, and it hit my heart so much. Like, wow, you know. So.
Yeah, I think it's
And
time
he was
for-
in Cleveland.
You have time for one more question?
Hi, thank you so much. This is such a wonderful panel. My question, well, to preface it, I think that what we've seen here is just the tremendous power of stories and being able to tell your own story. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from that. So my question is, I'm out of curiosity, I wonder if you think that there are stories that aren't being told, and maybe stories that you would like to see more of, just off the top of your head. Thanks.
You mean New York stories or in comics?
Kind of both, since this is the topic.
Right.
But, beyond that, I'm just curious to know.
Yeah. Well, in a weird way, I mean, Al, you've made a career out of the two major things that people know you for. But do you ever wanted to do a full autobio story, or tell someone else's story, a New York story, or?
I thought about doing something autobiographical, and as a matter of fact, I was working with a publisher on the idea, but it was very slow in coming. So my friend Mary Lou Weissman came to me one day, and we met actually, and we were chatting, and she decided that she would like to do an article about me, and then she decided that she wanted to extend it into my biography. So that kind of short-circuited my...
Well, you did 75 new illustrations for the
Pardon?
You did 75 new illustrations for the biography, so you had a hand in it.
I did the illustrations for it, but
It's on sale here.
it would have been fun, although it probably would have taken the rest of my life to do a graphic novel, where you have dialogue and in this case, all the dialogue was in text form, and I just put an illustration there, which was a lot easier. But years ago, when I thought of the idea, the first thought that occurred to me is that who would be interested in anything like that? I mean, it's my personal story. I'm interested. Why would anyone else be interested? But I've been proven wrong by all the successful examples.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I think I'm being told to wrap it up. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.